The sun painted Los Angeles in soft orange light as John Cena jogged through the quiet suburban streets. His gray athletic shirt clung to his chest, navy shorts moving with each steady step. This was his sanctuary. No cameras, no screaming fans, just the rhythm of his feet against pavement and the cool morning air filling his lungs. For these precious moments, he could forget about the world of entertainment and simply exist. Birds chirped lazily from manicured lawns as the city slowly awakened. John's breathing was even, his pace comfortable. He loved mornings like this, when everything felt peaceful and the world seemed full of possibility. The stress of his career melted away with each stride, replaced by a sense of calm that only these solitary runs could provide. But peace is a way of shattering without warning. As John rounded a corner near a small neighborhood park, a voice cut through the morning stillness like a blade. It was filled with rage, dripping with hate. "You blind black little freak. You just ran over my foot, you stupid brat." John stopped dead in his tracks. The venom in those words sent ice through his veins. This wasn't just anger. This was something darker, something that made his stomach turn. His instincts kicked in immediately, and he followed the source of the commotion. Just ahead, at the corner of the park's entrance, a small crowd was beginning to gather. Some people stood in shocked silence. Others raised their phones to record what was happening. In the center of it all stood a white female police officer, her face red with fury. She was gripping a black rubber baton in her right hand, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths as she pointed down at someone. The someone was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 10, sitting in a worn-out wheelchair with a slightly tilted front wheel. Her dark skin contrasted sharply with a bright pink t-shirt decorated with an anime character. Purple sweatpants and mismatched shoes completed her outfit, but it was her eyes that caught John's attention, wide with fear, yet burning with defiance. "I didn't mean to," the girl stammered, her small voice trembling. "You were standing in the middle of the path. I didn't see." The officer leaned down, practically spitting her words into the child's face. "Don't give me excuses, you useless brat. Maybe if your lazy ass had brakes, I wouldn't be limping now. Is that how you were raised? To plow into people like you own the damn street?" A collective gasp rippled through the growing crowd of witnesses. John felt his fists clench involuntarily, his muscles tensing as he watched this uniformed adult berate a disabled child. "I said I'm sorry," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sorry doesn't fix my foot, you worthless little rat," the officer roared, her voice echoing off the nearby buildings. "You're just another drain on taxpayers, a parasite with wheels." The words hit John like physical blows. He had seen cruelty before, had witnessed injustice in many forms, but watching a sworn protector terrorize a child in a wheelchair was something that shook him to his core. The girl's situation was heartbreaking enough, clearly struggling with mobility, probably facing daily challenges most people couldn't imagine, and here was someone who should be helping her, making her feel like less than human. But the little girl surprised everyone. Despite her fear, despite the intimidating figure looming over her, she found her voice. "You're a police officer. You're supposed to protect people." The woman's laughter was sharp and bitter, cutting through the morning air like broken glass. "I'm the law, sweetheart, and the law says I don't have to take lip from a broken mistake like you." What happened next would haunt everyone who witnessed it. Without warning, the officer's hand whipped across the girl's cheek with a sharp crack that seemed to echo forever. The child's head snapped to the side, and several people in the crowd cried out in horror. Phones shook in trembling hands as people recorded the unthinkable, a police officer striking a disabled child. Yet still, incredibly, no one moved forward. No one tried to intervene. Fear seemed to have frozen everyone in place, creating a circle of helpless witnesses around an act of pure cruelty. The girl blinked hard, tears forming in her eyes, but she didn't cry. Slowly, she turned her head back to face her attacker, her cheek already reddening from the blow. When she spoke, her voice shook but her words were clear. "You're not the law. You're just a pig in a uniform." The officer's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She raised the baton with both hands, her knuckles white with fury. "I'll teach you to talk to me like that, you little monster." John stepped forward, every muscle in his body coiled and ready. But before he could reach them, another voice rang out behind him, deeper, more thunderous, impossible to ignore. "Put it down." Every head turned. Walking toward them with long, determined strides was Dwayne Johnson. His white tank top stretched across his massive frame, black shorts completing his workout attire. His arms were tense, his jaw locked tight as he took in the scene before him. The raised baton, the terrified child, the circle of frozen onlookers. His eyes moved from the officer to the girl, then back to the weapon held high in the air. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. I said, "Put it down. Now." The morning air seemed to thicken as Dwayne Johnson's commanding presence filled the space. The officer hesitated, caught completely off guard by the sudden appearance of this imposing figure. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face, but it was quickly replaced by defensive pride and renewed aggression. "You have no jurisdiction here," she snapped, her voice rising to match her growing indignation. "This is police business, and you need to back off right now." Dwayne's expression didn't change. His voice remained steady, cold as winter steel. "You're assaulting a child and threatening her with a weapon. That's not police business. That's criminal behavior." Before anyone could respond to this accusation, the sound of heavy boots approached from behind the female officer. 11 male officers, all white, emerged from the direction of nearby patrol vehicles. They moved with practiced precision, forming a defensive line behind their colleague. Some had their hands positioned near their holsters, while others were already gripping batons or tasers. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't just one rogue officer losing control. This was an organized show of force. The crowd of witnesses began to murmur nervously. What had started as one person's abuse of power was rapidly escalating into something far more dangerous. Parents pulled their children closer, elderly onlookers stepped back, and those still recording held their phones with shaking hands. But Dwayne Johnson didn't flinch. John Cena stepped up beside him, and the two men stood shoulder to shoulder, creating a human shield between the little girl in her wheelchair and the wall of armed officers. Their presence was both protective and defiant, two celebrities using their bodies to guard a child who had no one else. One of the male officers called out, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "You two need to leave immediately. You're interfering with official police authority, and we won't tolerate it." John's eyes never left the little girl behind them. When he spoke, his voice was calm but filled with barely contained outrage. "This girl accidentally ran over someone's foot. That's it. And you're all acting like she pulled a gun on you. Where's the proportionality? Where's the basic human decency?" The female officer's face was still flushed with anger and embarrassment. "She assaulted an officer!" she barked, as if saying it louder would make it more believable. Dwayne turned slightly, keeping his body positioned protectively but allowing himself to address her directly. "She barely weighs 70 pounds. You outweigh her by 200. And you hit her. We all saw it. Everyone here saw it." The phones were indeed still recording, capturing every word and gesture. The witnesses had formed their own protective circle around the confrontation, documenting everything for the world to see. Social media was about to explode with footage that would change everything. The tension in the air was electric, like lightning building before a massive storm. One of the officers stepped forward, his baton raised in a threatening gesture. His face was twisted with the kind of anger that comes from having authority challenged in public. "You're making a big mistake," he growled, moving closer to John and Dwayne. John's response was simple but powerful. "No, you already made yours." For a moment that felt like an eternity, time seemed suspended. The wind rustled through nearby trees, a bird chirped obliviously in the distance, and the early sun cast long shadows across the pavement. But in the center of it all, 12 armed police officers stood face to face with 2 unarmed men who absolutely refused to back down. Behind them, the little girl clutched a small stuffed rabbit that no one had noticed before. Her cheek was still stinging from the slap, her lips trembling. But not from fear anymore. Something had changed in her expression. The terror was being replaced by something else entirely, rage at the injustice of it all. The female officer, red-faced and still gripping her baton with white knuckles, looked from Dwayne to John and then back to her fellow officers. Her pride was wounded, her authority challenged, and her actions captured on multiple cameras. In that moment, she made a decision that would define the rest of her career. "They're obstructing an investigation," she barked at her colleagues. "Take them down." The order hung in the air like a death sentence. The other officers looked hesitant for just a split second. Even they seemed to recognize that this was crossing a line. But loyalty, misplaced pride, and the pack mentality of uniformed brotherhood overcame reason. One officer stepped forward with a stun gun, his finger moving toward the trigger. Another raised his baton high, preparing to strike. The crowd gasped collectively, phones capturing what felt like a scene from an action movie. Except this was real, happening right now on a peaceful morning street. Dwayne moved first. With the fluid precision of someone who had trained his entire life of physical confrontation, he sidestepped the baton swing, grabbed the officer's extended arm, and twisted it behind his back. The man crashed to the ground with a heavy thud, his weapon clattering uselessly across the pavement. Simultaneously, John intercepted the officer with a taser. His hand shot out, grabbing the device before it could fire, and with one quick practice motion, he disarmed the man and sent him stumbling backward into his colleagues. The crowd erupted in shouts and gasps. This was no longer just about a little girl and a cool officer. This had become something unprecedented. Two of the world's most recognizable figures were engaged in actual physical combat with multiple police officers, all because they refused to let a disabled child be brutalized. 3 more officers charged forward simultaneously. Dwayne ducked under one strike and delivered a devastating elbow to the second officer's ribs. The man doubled over, gasping for breath, as Dwayne swept the legs of the third attacker, sending him crashing into the grass. John caught a baton strike with his forearm, grimaced at the impact, but responded immediately with a powerful shoulder thrust that knocked his attacker off balance and sent him tumbling across the sidewalk. The female officer screamed above the chaos, her voice shrill with desperation and fury. "Get them! All of them! I want these interfering celebrities on the ground now." 5 more officers rushed forward in unison, their coordination speaking to years of training together. But they had never trained for this, facing 2 men who were not only physically powerful but also fighting with a moral certainty that comes from protecting the innocent. Dwayne took a defensive stance directly in front of the wheelchair, his massive frame creating an impenetrable barrier. When one officer lunged at him with a baton raised high, Dwayne blocked the swing with his forearm, grabbed the man by his tactical vest, and executed a perfect hip throw that sent the officer flying through the air before landing hard on the pavement. Another officer tried to tackle Dwayne from behind, thinking he could use the element of surprise. But John had anticipated this move. He intercepted the charging officer with a shoulder block that lifted the man off his feet and slammed him into the hood of a nearby patrol cruiser with a metallic crash that echoed through the neighborhood. The crowd was in complete pandemonium now. Some people were screaming, others were cheering, and many were still recording everything on their phones. Children were crying, parents were shouting instructions to each other, and elderly witnesses were calling 911 on their cell phones. What had started as a quiet morning in a peaceful neighborhood had exploded into something that looked like a war zone. The last 2 officers still standing paused, their confidence shattered. They looked around at the unconscious and groaning bodies of their colleagues scattered across the street and sidewalk. They saw the cameras, the crowd, and most importantly, they saw the little girl they had all turned against, a disabled child who had done nothing more than accidentally bump into someone while navigating a public sidewalk. One of them was gripping his baton with white-knuckled fists, his hands shaking slightly. Reality was setting in. They were on the wrong side of this confrontation, and everyone knew it. The footage being captured would be seen by millions of people within hours. John turned to face these last 2 officers, his chest rising and falling from the exertion, but his voice completely steady. "This ends now. Back off." Dwayne, breathing heavily but still radiating control power, pointed toward the girl they had been protecting throughout this entire ordeal. "She's a child. She came here with wheels. You came here with weapons. Think about what that says about all of you." The female officer who had started this entire confrontation was trembling now, not with fear, but with a kind of rage that comes from having your worldview completely shattered. Her face was contorted with hatred as she screamed, "She hit me first. She deliberately ran into me. She's nothing but trash on wheels." The words hung in the air like poison. Even her fellow officers seemed uncomfortable with the raw hatred in her voice. The crowd murmured angrily, and someone shouted, "We've got everything on camera. You're finished." Another voice added, "The whole world is going to see what you did to that little girl." But it was the child herself who provided the most powerful response. In a voice that was clear and strong despite everything she had endured, she said, "My name is Lionel. I'm not trash. I'm more human than you'll ever be." The moment hit everyone like a physical force. Here was a 10-year-old girl in a wheelchair who had been slapped and terrorized by a police officer who had watched 12 adults with weapons try to hurt the only 2 people who had stood up for her, and she was the one showing dignity and humanity. Dwayne walked slowly toward the female officer, his presence commanding absolute attention. "You hit a child. You threatened her with a weapon. You called in 11 backup officers to handle 2 unarmed men because your ego couldn't handle being challenged by a little girl in a wheelchair. Your badge isn't just a disgrace. It's a mockery of everything law enforcement is supposed to represent." He reached out calmly and took the baton from her trembling hands. She didn't resist. "You're done," he said simply. In the distance, the sound of sirens was growing louder. Real backup was arriving. Actual investigators responding to the multiple 911 calls from witnesses who had been reporting the confrontation as it unfolded. Several squad cars pulled up simultaneously, their red and blue lights flashing across the scene. Uniformed officers stepped out, looking confused and alarmed at what they found. 8 of their fellow officers were on the ground, either unconscious or groaning in pain. 2 celebrities stood protectively over a little girl in a wheelchair, surrounded by dozens of concerned citizens who were all talking at once, showing their phone footage, and demanding that justice be served. A supervisor approached, clearly the ranking officer among the newcomers. He looked from John to Dwayne to the female officer, then surveyed the scene of destruction around them. "What the hell happened here?" John's response was direct and unambiguous. "We stopped an assault on a child." Dwayne added, "And we have dozens of witnesses and multiple videos to prove every word we're saying." As the new officers began to assess the situation, questioning witnesses and reviewing the phone footage, paramedics arrived to check on Lionel. Her cheek was red and swollen where she had been struck, but she was conscious, alert, and remarkably composed for someone who had just been through such a traumatic experience. John crouched beside her wheelchair, his voice gentle. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need anything?" Lionel nodded slowly. "I was scared at first, but then you and Mr. Johnson came, and I knew someone was finally going to help me." John smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "You were incredibly brave. We just helped you show everyone else what courage looks like." Dwayne approached and gently took her small hand in his much larger one. "We're going to make sure no one ever treats you like this again. That's a promise." Lionel looked up at the 2 men who had literally stood between her and harm, and for the first time that morning, she smiled. It was a small smile, but it contained something powerful. Hope. A few feet away from where Lionel was being treated by paramedics, the female officer who had started this entire confrontation was being escorted toward the back of a patrol cruiser. Her hands were cuffed behind her back, and her face showed a mixture of disbelief and fury. The very system she thought would always protect her was now turning its investigative gaze inward. The crowd that had gathered was no longer silent and afraid. They were energized, angry, and determined to see justice served. As the officer was placed in the back of the police car, people began to cheer. Someone started clapping, and soon the entire group was applauding, not for the violence they had witnessed, but for the accountability that was finally taking place. News vans began arriving within minutes, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky as reporters rushed to set up cameras and interview witnesses. The story was already spreading across social media, but traditional news outlets wanted their piece of what was clearly going to be a national story. Dwayne and John were immediately approached by reporters offering exclusive interviews, but both men refused without hesitation. "This isn't about us," Dwayne said firmly to a persistent journalist. "This is about her," he added, nodding toward Lionel. A reporter tried a different approach. "But surely you want to tell your side of the story? Your fans will want to know why you got involved." John's response was equally direct. "Our side is simple. We saw a child being hurt, and we stopped it. That's what any decent person should do." While the adults were handling interviews and investigations, Lionel sat quietly in her wheelchair, now wrapped in a fresh blanket provided by the paramedics. A reporter noticed her sitting there and approached carefully. "Would you like to tell people what happened to you?" the journalist asked gently. Lionel looked up, her eyes still showing traces of the fear she had felt, but also something new, determination. "Can I tell my story?" she asked. The reporter nodded and handed her the microphone. Cameras turned toward this small girl who had somehow become the center of a story that was about to change everything. When Lina spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "My name is Lina. I'm 10 years old. Last year, I was in an accident. A police car hit my mom's car. The officer was drunk, but he didn't go to jail. My mom died, and I haven't been able to walk since then." The crowd went completely silent. Even the reporters stopped moving, hanging on every word. Today, another police officer hit me again. She slapped me across the face. She called me horrible names. She said I didn't matter, that I was worthless. But I do matter. I want everyone to know that just because someone wears a badge doesn't mean they get to hurt people. Not anymore. As she spoke, a single tear slid down her cheek, not from fear or sadness, but from the strength it took to tell her truth to the world. Dwayne and John stood behind her, their arms crossed, serving as silent guardians while she found her voice. The camera footage and interviews spread like wildfire across the internet. Within hours, clips of the confrontation appeared on every social media platform. Some videos were shaky and vertical, recorded by nervous bystanders, while others were in high definition, captured by people who had been close enough to document everything clearly. Hashtags began trending worldwide. #JusticeForLina and #NoMoreBadgeAbuse appeared on millions of posts. People weren't just sharing the videos. They were adding their own stories of police misconduct, their own experiences with injustice, and their own calls for systemic change. By that evening, national news networks were interrupting their regular programming to cover the story. Talk show hosts, political commentators, celebrities, and activists all weighed in with their opinions. Some tried to spin the narrative, talking about the escalation of force or questioning whether civilian intervention was appropriate. But the footage made the truth undeniable. A disabled child had been brutally treated by someone sworn to protect her, and it had taken 2 outsiders to stop the abuse. Meanwhile, John and Dwayne deliberately stayed out of the spotlight. They didn't give interviews, they refused to appear on talk shows, and they declined every request for public appearances. Instead, they stayed with Lina. The hospital they had taken her to was private, clean, and quiet, a far cry from the overcrowded public facilities she was used to. She was given a comprehensive medical examination, including scans to check for internal injuries from the assault and immediate treatment for her swollen cheek. But more importantly, her medical file, which had been overlooked and nearly lost in the bureaucracy of public health care, was now being reviewed by top specialists. John sat beside her hospital bed as she rested, her stuffed rabbit tucked in beside her. Dwayne paced slowly near the window, his massive frame silhouetted against the evening light. "She's incredibly strong," John said softly, watching Lina sleep peacefully despite everything she had been through. "She's stronger than most grown men I've met," Dwayne replied. The way she looked that officer in the eye and spoke her truth, that takes more courage than any physical fight. John nodded, then picked up Lina's medical chart from a bedside table. As he read through it, his expression grew darker. "Did you see this?" he asked quietly. Dwayne walked over and read the details silently. Car accident caused by intoxicated police officer. Mother deceased. Child sustained severe spinal injury. Responsible officer faced no charges, no suspension, and was actually promoted 2 months after the incident. Internal review concluded no wrongdoing occurred. "We can't let this go," John said grimly. "This isn't just about what happened today. This is about a pattern of abuse that's been going on for years." Dwayne clenched his jaw as he continued reading. "Look at this. She's been on a waiting list for surgery that could help her walk again. The kind of list that takes years because she has no insurance, no connections, no one advocating for her." The 2 men exchanged a look that needed no words. They had both built their careers on entertaining people, on creating fictional stories of good triumphing over evil. But this was real life, and this little girl deserved more than just protection from one incident. She deserved a chance at the future that had been stolen from her. The next morning brought news that would reshape the entire Los Angeles Police Department. The female officer who had assaulted Lina was formally arrested and charged with multiple counts: child endangerment, assault under color of authority, and abuse of power. The police chief, facing unprecedented public pressure and clear video evidence of systemic problems, announced his resignation effective immediately. Several officers who had participated in the confrontation faced disciplinary action, ranging from suspension to termination. For the first time in years, the city was actually holding its own law enforcement accountable for their actions. John received a call from a prominent journalist offering him a substantial sum for an exclusive interview about the incident. He refused immediately. Dwayne received similar offers from talk show producers, book publishers, and movie studios wanting to turn the story into entertainment. He declined them all. Instead, they issued a joint statement through their representatives. "This is Lionel's story, not ours. We were simply witnesses who chose to act. The real heroes are the ones who speak truth even when their voices shake, and the children who refuse to be silenced by those who abuse their power." But the attention wasn't going away. Lionel was invited to speak at schools, youth centers, and community organizations across the country. With each appearance, she became more confident and articulate. She didn't want to be seen as a victim or even as a symbol. She wanted to be a voice for other children like herself, for the ones who couldn't speak up, for the ones who were too afraid to tell their stories. The doctor who had been treating Lionel approached John and Dwayne with remarkable news. After reviewing her case files and conducting new tests, he believed that with the right surgery and rehabilitation, there was a genuine chance he could regain some mobility. It wouldn't be full walking ability, he explained, but possibly the use of a walker, significantly less pain, and much better control over her movements. The surgery is complex and expensive, but the potential outcomes are very promising. When they told Lionel about this possibility, she looked at them with cautious hope mixed with practical concern. "That costs a lot of money, doesn't it? Like, more money than most people have." "It's completely covered," John said simply. "Don't worry about any of that." "Is it because people are watching now?" she asked with the perceptiveness of someone who had learned not to trust easy answers. "No," Dwayne said, kneeling beside her wheelchair. "It's because you deserve every chance of the best life possible. That was true before any cameras were rolling, and it'll be true long after they're gone." While Lionel was preparing for surgery and rehabilitation, the broader implications of her story continued to unfold across the country. The mayor of Los Angeles called for comprehensive police reform. Civil rights organizations mobilized around her case as an example of systemic problems that needed immediate attention. Crowds gathered outside police stations demanding accountability and change. Pressure mounted from every direction. Anonymous sources within the police department began leaking emails, body camera footage, and old complaint records that revealed the female officer who had assaulted Lionel had a long history of violence and racial bias that had been ignored, covered up, and excused for years. Dwayne received a call from someone in Washington, a high-ranking official who wanted to discuss using Lionel's case as a catalyst for federal police reform legislation. After the call, he found John in the hospital cafeteria and shared what he had learned. "They want to make this into something bigger," Dwayne said. "National legislation, federal oversight, real systemic change." John frowned. "Is that good or bad for her?" "Depends on whether they are serious about change or just looking for good publicity," Dwayne replied. "But it could mean that what happened to her actually prevents it from happening to other kids." Later that day, they took Lionel outside in her wheelchair for some fresh air. Security kept paparazzi at a respectful distance, but a small crowd had gathered nearby. Unlike the frightened, passive witnesses from that first morning, these people were energized and supportive. They held signs with messages like "Protect our children," "End police terror," and "Lionel equals courage." One woman approached them carefully, holding her own daughter's hand. "Can we say hello?" the woman asked politely. Lionel looked at John, who nodded encouragingly. The woman knelt down to Lionel's eye level. "I just wanted to tell you that you're incredibly brave," she said. "And my daughter has something she wants to give you." The little girl stepped forward shyly and handed Lionel a small plastic bracelet made of colorful beads. "It says hero," she whispered. Lionel took the bracelet gently, her eyes widening as she read the letters. "Thank you," she said softly, slipping it onto her wrist next to her hospital identification band. That night, back in her hospital room, Lionel couldn't sleep. She stared out the window at the city lights, the beaded bracelet on her wrist catching the light from the hallway. John sat nearby reading case files, and Dwayne stood at the far end of the room making quiet phone calls to lawyers and advocates. "I'm scared," she said suddenly. Both men looked up immediately. "Of the surgery?" John asked. She shook her head. "Of talking to more people. What if they don't believe me? What if they say I'm making things up or trying to get attention?" "They can't," Dwayne said, walking over to her bedside. "There's too much proof. Too many witnesses. And there's something else. There are other kids out there with stories just like yours. You're giving them permission to speak up too. But what if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing?" John moved his chair closer to her bed. "You're not just lying anymore. You're the girl who stood up to a police officer twice her size. You're the girl who told the truth when it was dangerous. You're the girl who made the whole world stop and listen. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself." She looked at both of them, these two enormous men who had literally put their bodies between her and harm, who had refused to profit from her story, who had stayed by her side through everything that followed. "Will you be there?" she asked. "For whatever comes next?" "Every step of the way," Dwayne promised. The next morning brought news that would change Lionel's life forever. The surgery was approved and scheduled with the best pediatric spinal specialist in the country. A rehabilitation program was designed specifically for her needs. Most importantly, a legal fund had been established to pursue justice for the drunk driving incident that had killed her mother and left her disabled in the first place. As Lionel prepared for surgery, she held a small press conference in the hospital's garden. Reporters from around the world gathered to hear what she had to say. "My name is Lionel Miller," she began, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "I'm 10 years old. A few weeks ago, I thought my story didn't matter. I thought I was invisible. But I learned something important. Your story matters when you decide to tell it. Your voice matters when you decide to use it." She paused, looking directly into the cameras. "There are other kids like me. Kids who have been hurt, kids who have been ignored, kids who think no one cares about them. I want them to know that someone does care. I want them to know they are not invisible. And I want them to know that sometimes, when you speak up for yourself, giant will come and stand beside you." The cameras captured her words, but more importantly, they captured her spirit, the unbreakable determination of a child who had faced the worst of humanity and chosen to respond with courage, hope, and an unwavering belief in justice. As she was wheeled into surgery later that day, Lionel Miller was no longer just a disabled girl who had been abused by a police officer. She was a symbol of resilience, a voice of the voiceless, and living proof that sometimes the smallest person in the room can change the entire world. John and Dwayne waited in the hospital corridor as the surgery began, knowing that whatever happened next, this little girl had already accomplished something extraordinary. She had reminded everyone that justice has no age limit, courage has no size requirement, and heroes sometimes come in the most unexpected forms. The fight for justice wasn't over. It was just beginning, and Lionel Miller would be leading the way.